All right, hello, patrons. Welcome to another episode of bonus content where we actually do the Googling and the research to answer all of our unanswered questions during the episode. So today, what I've brought to the table for the two of you, for your learning enjoyment, I just really wanted to know what the internet has to say about these Levite power dynamics.
Yeah, why were they
I
the
see.
chosen
you went
people?
political rather than mathematical.
Yes.
They're the chosen people within the
and,
chosen people.
Exactly. They're like the extra chosen
Yeah.
people. And I will say, when I tried to Google Levite power dynamics, it led me to a research paper where literally every page of this research paper, the footnotes took up 90% of the page
Wow.
Okay.
to a point where there was literally one line of text at the top of the page, and then the rest of it was the continued footnote.
From the page before.
From the page before,
Wow.
yes. And so I was just like, I cannot even dive into this, like, cannot even penetrate this. I saw some writers talking about, like, you got to look at the Levites like they're the scientists who run the nuclear power station. That
Like Chernobyl?
they
Okay.
need to, let's
well,
say, a
hopefully they did
functioning.
a better job.
Yes, let's
Sorry,
say a
maybe too
functioning
soon.
nuclear power station.
Just, that's what came to
Basically,
mind.
they got to make sure that everyone follows these very careful, strict rules to make sure that there's no accidents, there's no contamination,
So
and to make sure the whole community is
God
safe.
is the nuclear weapon, is basically what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Essentially.
He's the
Yeah.
reactor.
Okay.
He's the
Yes,
nuclear reactor.
he's the nuclear reactor. People did point out that maybe the balancing point is the fact that the Levites, they don't have any land ownership. They don't get any kind of permanent tribal residence, and there's no evidence that they even ever did own land. And so supposedly that's kind of the give and take, is that, yeah, you get kind of all these benefits and you get taken care of by the community, but you yourself can't own any land. There's some really interesting theories. There's also theories that they were maybe Egyptians originally. There were theories that,
That they
They were
took
like
them?
in there, like
well, so it was kind of like while the Israelites were in Egypt, that the Levites may have originally been this other community, this other kind of nomadic Egyptian community that started hanging out with them. And some scholars have pointed out the fact that a lot of the cast of characters who are Levites have names of Egyptian origin, actually. So I think that's what's kind of led them to that theory. And it's like the idea that originally they would have been nomadic, not owning any land as it is, and maybe they carried that along with them, which I think is an interesting theory. Not everyone believes that theory, but that is one of the theories that are out there. I also found people talked about, it was actually a pretty common practice for someone from another tribe to dedicate one of their sons to the Levites.
well, we were reading
Yes.
about that before. Yeah.
We did read about that, and they were talking about in practical matters, it's like, first of all, you've got the issue of when property is being passed down the family line. If you have, let's say, 5 sons, and you've had to split your property into like 5 chunks, and you've really kind of diluted your property and wealth,
Right.
versus if you're like, I'm going to give up one of these sons.
Yikes.
Gosh.
Just to...
No, seriously, that they're saying, like, on a functional level, it's like, yeah, you don't have to split up your property as much. If you're a poor family where you just can't support this many kids,
Wow.
you know, that giving your child up to the priesthood, and this is something that didn't happen just with the Israelites. This happened in a lot of like agrarian communities. But that was the way of like, it takes strain off of us to feed this child. And we also know that the child's going to be taken care of and stable because they're going to this tribe that's cared for by the community.
To that I say
Which I
hashtag
thought was
birth
interesting.
control. I mean, I know back then, I
We're
know,
so,
but I'm just saying.
so far away from that.
Yeah.
DNA tracking can actually track people who are of the tribe of
Whoa.
the Levites. Still to this
Wait, like
day,
you
Wait.
can know which.
you can know. Like, or at least, you know, scientists have been able to find a way to essentially track a lineage that goes back to Aaron,
Wow.
essentially. And then I got even further down the rabbit hole and found that Cohen, the very common Jewish last name Cohen, that was the title of the priest.
Huh.
Oh, is it? So Cohen
Cohen.
means the priest.
Priest. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's possible that they're also related, or well, I mean,
possible,
that
but
originally
there's
that
such
family
a
name.
there's such a diaspora now, you
Right,
know, that
right.
it's, and people have intermarried, and specifically, you know, Reform Jews don't necessarily, I think, buy into the whole like different delineations to different tribes, at least nowadays.
Right.
But yeah, that was where the name Cohen
Makes
comes
me
from.
recall Roy Cohen, who is a very famous McCarthy era lawyer and one of
Oh, right. Roy Cohn? Was Cohn from Cohen?
Cohen. No, Cohen. Sorry, I just said that weirdly. Roy Cohen is.
But it was Cohn. I've heard most people say it as Roy Cohn.
Oh, I thought that it was.
I would
he
imagine
was-
they were from the same thing.
but he
though.
was Jewish, so I guess it would make sense that
I've heard Roy Cohen, but not.
even though there's no E in it,
No, I thought that it was CH. It's also from Angels in America. He's a character. That guy is a
Yes,
character
he's
in
a
Angels in
character.
America.
Well,
Yeah.
if we all recall that the Hebrew alphabet does not have any vowels at all, so really
Isaiah
that
starts with
makes
the
sense. Those would be the same.
J?
Yes.
Isaiah starts with
Or
a J.
something, yeah.
Is it J or I? No, J, because
J,
I would
yeah.
be regular. Yeah.
Right.
I, and then he almost dies. Yikes.
Anyway, realistically, it makes sense that it would be hard on just a cursory Google search to find people who are really willing to kind of criticize the idea of these power dynamics being behind the Levites.
Yeah.
So I don't think I really got to the bottom of that, but I found a lot of trivia about that in the meantime. That's all I
I
got.
think that's going to be the theme of this
I
bonus
know.
Yeah,
episode.
basically.
That's kind of what I got too.
poorly executed, just like our reading of the Bible.
Oh boy.
Yeah, let's see. I can go into mine. Initially, and what I wrote in Google was numbers 1 and 2. Why were some tribes listed twice in the census? Because in specifically numbers 2, we found that like Reuben and who else? Your guy, Judah, and some other guy, they were like listed twice with like really humongous numbers. And I got no good
Yes.
explanation for that, but I did see that this was saying, okay, notice that Ephraim, who was Joseph's one of Joseph's sons. So Ephraim's numbers are larger than Manasseh. So this is Manasseh. This is in accordance with the blessing of Jacob in Genesis 48:19. So that's like a callback to that, apparently.
Or what does Jacob say, that Ephraim's just going to do better?
I guess, yeah,
than
that
Manasseh?
Ephraim
That
is going to
sounds vaguely
have
familiar.
more kids than Manasseh.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Manasseh.
Manana. Yeah. So that's kind of fun.
Okay.
And then also, yeah, I found this really fun, which I'm going to try to remember to put in our Instagram, but this really cool little like thing of, you were exactly right, Dedeker, that it was in the shape of a cross, north, south, east, and west, where the tabernacle of meeting is in the middle, and I'm assuming the Levites were around. But I sent it to y'all, and if you can look at it, it shows that Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, were all to the north.
Naphtali.
Yeah.
With a total of 157,600. And then to the east, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun with a total of 180,400.
I see.
And then to
Okay.
the south,
Okay.
Interesting.
yeah, Reuben, Simeon, and Gad, total 151,450. And then to the west, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin, total 108,100. So these all go, it looks like, so the tribes,
It was a little bit.
it
like a
was
cross.
exactly like
Yeah.
a cross. So yeah, the tribes were to march in the order given: the camp of Judah first, etc. The Levites marched after Gad and before Ephraim. So yeah, okay, so I see. So they do it in order based on the north and then east and then south and then west. So I think they go in a complete like circle and then
Like a counterclockwise
correct.
circle starting from the north.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's kind of fun. Yeah, so I'll try to post that because that's a really interesting thing. And basically it says, so the total...
Oh.
What?
Wait, it's all coming together for me now, because
Yeah.
these numbers that are the total, those are the second numbers that are listed again.
Oh!
So,
So
it's
they
like
just make it
one
really
tribe's like the leader of each
the
of those.
leader of
Wow,
each of
three.
these
with our
triunes.
combined heads, we answered the question that we were looking out for. Look at us.
Wow.
Good job.
Amazing.
Oh, that's so good.
I mean, I don't feel like satisfied and like I understand any of this, but
Right. But it does seem like, okay, so of each of those directions, the innermost one is the one that they named the second time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of like they're
So-
kind of in charge of all these
Of
three.
those
Yeah.
three tribes. So who are those leaders
So
then? It's
Dan, Judah,
Dan, Judah,
Reuben, and
yeah.
Ephraim.
Uh-huh.
So
Ephraim. So that's interesting. So yeah, one of Joseph's led that
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
Interesting.
yeah, that's
Okay.
very
Yeah,
interesting.
makes
And then
sense.
finally, this is very interesting. This article that I found, by the way, it's actually from a book called Believer's Bible Commentary by William MacDonald, whatever that is. But it's basically just like a commentary of each of the chapters of the books of the Bible. So this says the total number of men at war was 603,550. The total manpower, including the Levites, was 625,550. Assuming the men to be a third of the nation, then the total population must have been at least 1,876,650. The number of warriors is a better index of the strength of a church than of the number of pew sitters.
Whoa! What?
What?
Wait,
They really
wait,
took a left
yeah, I
turn
really
there.
got through. I was on board,
Hey,
and then suddenly that came
This is the
in.
Believer's Bible Commentary, so all that I'm saying
Yeah.
is...
All right. All right.
Because okay, you're mixing like what warriors in a church? No, like now I'm versus pew sitters. I'm like you're mixing all these images together, and I just can't get on
The
board.
strength of a church
Okay.
other than the number of pew sitters. I don't know. Anyways, go buy this book if you really want to know. But
Don't buy it. Here's just listen to our podcast some more. Here's okay. That's actually a good segue into this. So this comes from thetorah.com, which is they say they're a historical and contextual approach to the
yeah,
Torah.
we all came across this.
It's actually really, yeah, they've got some really interesting stuff. And this was this very long article about the censuses in Numbers, because there's going to be a number one, another one, spoiler alert.
Great.
There will be another census in this book. But anyway, what this is kind of pointing out is that number, that 603,550, is a problem. That there's a problem with this number, because that basically implies that we have a population of essentially 2 million people.
okay.
Which there's a number of problems with this. The first is the problem of this just equals like too many children per family.
What counts as too many? I don't think people in this time have limits on too many
You're probably
children.
right.
What they mean is just sustainably. So by doing the math from a previous point where they talked about the number of firstborns, I guess, or maybe a later point, that basically if these numbers are to be believed, that means for every firstborn, they have 29 siblings
Whoa.
who are male. So that's just not a reasonable number to
Right.
have.
That's a
right?
lot.
So unless like the mortality rate of firstborns is way worse than others, like these numbers just don't. That just seems unreasonable. Another one is that there's other passages in the Bible that talk about the Israelites being, quote, the fewest of all people, and other things like that. And based on other numbers from this time period, these numbers would make them massive compared to other groups out there. So they're kind of saying like, this is a bit of an issue.
Right. Of like, were they a small group or were they a very, very large group?
Right. And so there's a number of different people who've written about this. Some have attributed it to just exaggeration.
That's a big exaggeration,
basically-
though.
Like
And a
tag-
specific
Big exaggeration.
exaggeration.
Tagging on some zeros.
Another person's making the argument that it's because at the time they were using what's called a sexagesimal, which is a base 60 system, kind of, like hexadecimal or decimal or binary, that this was
Right.
a base 60 system. So maybe these numbers are totally different because of that. This was a system
Interesting.
used in ancient Mesopotamia, so maybe it was that.
My brain can't even wrap its brain around
Right,
base
yeah.
60.
My brain can't wrap its brain around base 60.
That's how thrown off I am by it.
Another one is that these numbers were estimated later on, like thousands of years later during the time of King David, based on populations they knew at the time.
I see.
That's possible. But here's the one that's really interesting to me, at least, is this word that's been translated as thousand could actually also be translated as contingent, because we're talking about warriors, right?
Yeah,
We're talking about fighting people. That this could be translated as a troop or a contingent. And so essentially the argument for this goes that the thing that gets translated as 1,000 actually means contingent, and then the number after that is the actual number of people in that contingent.
Oh, interesting.
So for example, something that said it's, 53,700.
Is actually just 53
It means there's 53
contingents?
contingents with 700 total.
Oh, that's really interesting. I feel like that
Yeah.
would be much more realistic. It would
So-
make much more sense.
So here's the math on this. Here's how it works out. Would be so Reuben would mean 46 contingents and a total of 500 men, which is approximately 40 men per
That
contingent.
seems more reasonable.
And like Judah, the biggest one in contingents, would have 74 contingents and 600 men. But under this system, actually the largest number of men would be Dan with 700, but he had fewer contingents at only 62.
So does Dedeker
So, like,
actually
maybe the size
lose?
of the contingents, right?
Hey, this is the bonus content. This doesn't count.
I mean, I still lose because Benjamin only has 400 men according to this
Yeah.
system.
So then
but
what total by that different system, how many fighting men are we talking about?
5,550.
Wow.
Wow.
That's not very
Okay.
many.
Very different number.
But that seems so much more manageable for people to be able to like count by hand.
Yeah. I
You
think
know.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point, too.
And for people to be able to like get up and move in the desert, like that's so much. I mean, still 5,000 is a lot of people. Plus, like there are, all the women and children and old people and things like that. But that's such a much more reasonable number of people to be traveling together.
Yeah,
I
I read a little bit of that same article, and they talked about how just the idea of like over 1 million or maybe 2 million people, walking around those lands at the time, it would just create such a devastating effect upon the land.
Yeah, it would. It would have such an impact.
It's kind of ridiculous to think of that, and also that like there wouldn't be enough water for all those people. They would just like die in droves, which I think is probably the case.
Yeah, so if we were to accept this new system, what this means is that now the average number of males per family is about 4 to 5 instead of 30.
Well, that makes sense.
It's much more
Makes sense.
realistic.
Just a little more reasonable.
That's definitely much more reasonable.
Still a lot.
Wow.
But
and that apparently
Yeah,
that,
but for back then, though, if like all you
Yeah.
really got to do is produce children, then
and that that number of 5,550 is closer in size to other known armies around the same time.
I see.
So this actually, that's pretty interesting. It still, however, does not explain the discrepancy in how those numbers added up.
Okay.
And like that the totals take those into account as if they're thousands.
maybe they
Right.
just
Right.
expect
Still-
these
So there's-
Bible scholars expect people to just, glaze over that, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. I was actually surprised at how many, like looking into this, there wasn't anything that was just like, these numbers don't add up.
Yeah.
What I did find though is that looking at other translations, like the Message Bible, for example, their numbers do add up.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that
What?
makes sense.
That
Somebody
they-
went back and were like,
the numbers.
no, we're making this work somehow. That makes sense.
Yeah, that they
That
like.
was the Message Bible. We're making this work
Yeah.
somehow.
That's their message, ultimately.
Yeah.
It's what it was. It was specifically those numbers, like for Judah, is that back in Numbers 1, those numbers were 74,600 instead of being 64
Oh,
and
so
then
they
74.
went back and
Went back
quote
and
unquote
fixed that
corrected
one.
it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think the total number from Numbers 1 still doesn't add up, but at least there's not that inconsistency of 10,000. So maybe that
Amazing.
was like a scribal error or something.
amazing.
But anyway, very interesting stuff.
Gosh, we learned so much in the bonus content, don't we?
Indeed. That's why y'all have to
Seriously.
become a patron. Tell your friends to become a patron if they aren't already. Thank you to all you out there who are already patrons and listening to us on a weekly basis. We can't wait to dive more into numbers next week with you.